Hi, it's Michael Kerr here, presenting Small Business Banter. A healthy micro and small business sector means a successful economy and a more vibrant society. Small Business Banter is about helping regional business owners better prepare for current challenges, but also for the next stage of business success. I'm Michael Kerr, founder of Kerr Capital, advisors to business owners. Each week, I interview a fellow small business owner or an expert, and they share their stories, their lived experiences, the wins and the losses, and their best advice to help you, the listener, get the most you can from your own business. Small Business Banter is brought to you from the studios of 104.7 Gippsland FM and is heard across Australia on the Community Radio Network. And thanks also to Kerr Capital, supporters of the show. Okay, so welcome to another edition of Small Business Banter Radio and Podcast. Really pleased to be joined today by Richard Shrapnel. Welcome in, Richard.
Thank you. Thanks, Michael.
So Richard will tell you about himself in a minute, but comes from a business services background. And what we're going to particularly focus on today is one of his publications called Going Broke, Staying Sane. And it's a workbook to help owners, facing financial distress to work their way through those problems. But we will get to that in a little bit. So, Richard, could you just give us a couple of minutes on your personal background and the bits that are relevant to, what the topic of today of small business distress and managing it better?
Yeah, absolutely. Look, I've spent most of my time in professional service firms, almost my entire life from the age of 17, and it's quite a few decades have been added on to that 17 years, working with small and family businesses, medium-sized enterprises as a chartered accountant, looking at how they're performing, where they're going to. And quite honestly, I found I was much better at talking to them about their business rather than putting tax returns in on time. And that's why I started to lean into very much as an advisor, and then went away and did some additional studies into the strategy. But one of the key areas, obviously, is in business, sometimes things don't go as expected. And you've got to say, so, the move is against me. The cash flow's, drying up. The reserves are going. What do I do? And this just really becomes a challenge for many people. So over the decades, I've actually written 3 versions of the book Going Broke, Staying Sane, which have just matured over those period of time. And the one which we've published and written now, obviously, is for those people who have really been hit by the COVID-19 lockdowns and really in many cases have just been forced out of business and sit there with a sense of no hope. What can I do?
Yeah, it's a very dark and lonely place. And so what we're going to try to do is step through this book that's in its 3rd edition and kind of give, I get a bit of a path forward. So, it is very much this episode pitched at those. And I must say, those close to the owners who can feel the impact just as deeply, if not more so. I think one of the quotes from the book was, finding a way through, but there will be scars. That is the nature of adversity, but finding that solid footing again, scars and all is what your goal should be. In terms of, you mentioned COVID-19, we've got a lot of small business, a lot of businesses full stop, under pressure, and some are doing well. But we want to try to give some guidance to those that aren't doing so well. So before we go into the, some of the kind of 7, I think there are 7 steps you outline in the book. Can we just talk a little bit about your sense of the numbers of businesses that are in trouble at the moment, and also how that trouble might manifest? What are the signals that the owners and their close ones should be looking out for, to really kind of as a starting point for doing something? Because it's easy to bury.
It is easy to bury. I honestly have no idea, and I don't think anyone does, of the extent of what the COVID-19 lockdowns have had on small businesses, medium-sized enterprises. As you said, some have done very well. They've just been in the right spot and they've been able to pivot. But there's many, many others which simply have not been. And if you walk through the shopping centres, if you walk through the CBDs, you'll see all the closed shops. And, and we look at them, we say, well, these are the restaurants, this is the tourism industry. But then there's all those industries which sit around that. But then there's others. If you think of people like dry cleaners, no one's going to work. Who needs their suit to be dry cleaned? If you think of many of the people who, provide services into offices, cleaners, the offices aren't being cleaned because there's no one in the offices. So the ripple effect of this through the economy and through businesses is significant. And even though we're sitting there here and we're saying, oh, well, the number of insolvencies aren't that great, I think we have yet to see what that floodgate is going to be. As businesses and business people hung on.
Yeah, well, I was just about to say hanging on, and there's this, it doesn't mean there's, it doesn't need a total obliteration. For a business to be under, extreme distress, it can be a slow, gradual, decline in revenues or customers, and then there's this, I talk to a lot of owners in my work each day. And there's a lot of that hanging on going on, and at some point, I've heard those same. I like you, the number of insolvencies, as a headline seems to be quite low, given what we're both seeing. But it sure is. It can be a gradual process. So I think this is why to maybe step into some of the what your guidebook, your workbook talks about is really helpful, because there may not be a one big trigger event. It might just be a gradual decline, and so we've got to there's both a compelling reason to do something, but also a danger that you let it slide because it's not all. I'm not bankrupt or I'm not out of business today, but you might be, and a lot of that also goes to the emotional, state of the owner and their capacity to keep going. So
in some cases, it's almost like, use the expression, death by 1,000 cuts. I'm just waiting for the sort of the COVID lockdown to be released, and then we can get back. But then we don't quite come back, and we're not coming back to the level we need to come back. And it's as we saw this very much in the last 6 months, it dragged on. And I think one of the questions business people have to ask themselves is, how much do I dig into my reserves? How much do I increase the debt which I'm carrying? How much do I pull out from my superannuation to try and keep the business alive? How much do I allow the outstanding commercial rents to grow? Because I'm going to have to pay all these things off. And I think it can be quite dangerous if you keep just allowing this to occur and you eat into what is basically your capital base, and suddenly it's gone and you can't come back from it. And I think there's that. You may call it a tipping point. That's not the right word, but I think you just have to be very cautious and maybe call it sooner rather than later. But if you've grown a business, your heart is in it, and it's very hard to surrender that.
Well, and by nature, owners that have built a business and have survived are, very resilient, and they've gotten to where they've gotten because they keep going. But you really do wonder, given even some of the positive signs that we had just recently have been overwhelmed by consumers staying at home because they're a little bit, concerned about going out. And there's been a few false starts, and maybe there's some more. So your advice is really good. That don't leave it talk. So just the way you see it come, like just a real quick answer to the way you see it manifesting or coming out, these kinds of financial difficulties in owners. Do you have any clear signals that they should be looking for themselves? I know they know, but maybe we come at it from the perspective of others, close to the owners, saying this is not right.
Yeah, small business people and business people have a tendency at times to lock themselves down. They don't share the difficulties with their family because they don't want to take the burdens of the business home. So, you touched on a very important point. For those who are around a business person, need to be very astute in picking up and understanding. And the signals are not hard. The doors are closed, the customer's not there. How long can we continue to survive? And, 2 conversations over the 1 2 years ago and 1 2 weeks ago. The 2 weeks ago was, so my staff are stood down. I can't pay them wages anymore. How long can I continue this forward with the hope that we can get back? I go back 2 years ago when COVID first came in and the lockdowns came in. And this is a medium to larger business, but privately owned. I'm dropping in $100,000 a month to meet my wages bill and to try and keep everyone going. How much of my superannuation do I draw down to do this? And these are really hard questions to answer. And I think they're questions you're going to answer from your heart and understanding your own financial position. But for the small business person, I think one of the key things is you must connect with people around you. You must share the burden. You must talk to those which are close to you and your advisors about what you see and what is being confronted. And you'll see one of the 7 steps which I've got here is champions. And that becomes a key point to make sure you bring champions beside you who have got your back and who can take you forward.
Yeah, that's going in sequence. That was number 4 on the table of contents. It's probably a good time to just. Do you want to just step through? There is a. I did purchase and I did read through the workbook, and I keep referring to it as a workbook because it does. You talk about having a pencil and you talk about using the printed version to collect thoughts and make notes, which I really like. It's you got to engage with it, and what you're saying overall here is you've got to communicate. So and sometimes just forcing yourself to write your thoughts as you go through a book in the allotted space is really quite helpful. So before we go into I'll get you to run through the 7 steps. Then we might just dig into each one of them and give a little bit of flavour to each of them. But on today's edition of Small Business Banter Radio and Podcast, I'm chatting with Richard Shrapnel, business advisor and also author and speaker on business strategy. So, Richard, if you could just firstly step through the 7 steps and then we'll go into how they play out.
Yeah, so 7 steps. Accept, clarify, action, champions, be real, care, and delight. And there is a sequence to these. There is a tipping point. You don't have to look at these, I would say, in sequence and order. But what I find is accept, clarify, action, those first 3 steps which we'll go through, brings you to a point at the top of the hill almost. And then you say, bring my champions on board. And then the be real, the care, and the light is the delivery of what you may call the solution to the problems I'm facing. So it's important you do that foundation work, you bring people beside you, and then you go forward. But I just see that point where you bring champions on as really a tipping point where you've got through the hard part and now the momentum is built and you're going to charge yourself forward. But 7 points. Accept, clarify, action, champions, be real, care, alight. And this is for not just the business person, but the family around them. And really it's just a formula for dealing with adversity.
Yeah. So accept, do you want to just quickly...
Yeah. So accept is about, and I've got to put this in the right context, accept is about, in simple words, accepting what has happened. It's not about releasing. It's not about saying it's okay. It's about accepting. So I'll give you an example. Remember back in the 80s and the 90s, we had interest rates up in the 20%, all sorts of things. I took significant losses at that time, and I was very angry because of the way in which some of my partners had acted and things which had happened. I took that anger forward for 6 years. It was in me. But when you're angry, you can't actually remove yourself from that challenge. You can't remove yourself from the problem you're trying to solve. And the first point of acceptance is really about saying, okay, it's happened. I need to acknowledge that it's happened, and I need to put myself in a position so I can deal with. So you've got to accept and begin to allow yourself to adapt. You've got to release it, but you've got to respond to it. You've got to accept there's been losses, and there's going to be more losses. You've got to permit yourself to grieve. You've got to reach out to people to seek help, and you've really got to be willing to go hand in hand with someone through the journey. So that's this acceptance. And if you don't accept, you're stuck.
I guess a big part of that is not blaming yourself. Accepting and saying, well, it's just in accounting terms, there might be some sunk costs, and it's harsh to just lightly say they're sunk costs. But getting to that point where it's I accept that, and I'm going to move on. So then that goes to clarify as another.
Second step is clarify. And clarify is getting the facts on the table. And this can be quite hard. So what are my losses? Where are my assets? Where are my liabilities? Whose name is on the line? Who has signed guarantees? Whose assets are exposed? I need to get all this information together and lay it out. And often in business, you just don't have a sense of this. And even in small businesses, you can have companies and trusts. So you've got to bring all those facts to the table so you can look at the financial position. But then the other side, you've got to bring to the table your ideas. What are the opportunities? What can I pivot? How can I mitigate the losses I've got? Who can I do deals with? So there's two sides to that. So clarifies facts on the table, ideas on the table. And it's just that gathering exercise.
Yeah. And it when things are going okay in business, it's easy to just keep moving forward and overlook some of that, what really is, the numbers in your business, what's driving your business, how your business really makes money, and then, it can be a bit of a shock. I've seen it many times with owners who, kind of hit a bit of a roadblock and, things just aren't quite what they imagined their profit and loss and balance sheet to look like. So then. And
that clarify, the book sets out a checklist, because some of the traps people get into is I gave a guarantee. My parents gave a guarantee 15 years ago and I've totally forgotten about it. But now it's on the line.
Yeah.
Did my spouse, my partner give a guarantee? What's at risk?
Yeah. And so then you I think you talk about action,
So the action then is, and you can see how we're doing this in steps. I've started to accept what's happening. I'm getting all the information together. Now let's lay this out on the kitchen table. What are my options? What can I do? What is the exposure? How do I mitigate that exposure? What can I save? And what are the things which may be essential for me to carry my business forward or to restart again? So this third step is about creating an action plan, and really having a sense of how you believe you're going to go forward. And that becomes important because that becomes an anchor.
For those listening, we'll give you a link to where you can get the book, but I do think this is very incredibly instructional to go through it this way, taking some action and leads into, I think, really nicely this idea of getting some other perspectives, some other emotional and professional support once you've, as an owner and the family, you've been through these first few steps. So that's where your champions comes in.
Yeah. And the champions are the people who are going to have your back. They believe in you. They want you to succeed. They have some business sense. They're honest, and they'll call it as they see it. And you're going to get 3-4 people beside you to help you go forward with this. And they're not necessarily, they shouldn't be paid. They should be there because they want to support you and they're cared for you. The professional advice is at another length. But your champions are the people who are going to journey you forward. They are close to you and they will support you and they will challenge you, but they have your back.
And and understanding and picking the right champions who, it might be difficult, but you've got to share. It's almost, could be like sharing a bit of, failure, and that's hard for anybody to. You talked about that. We've all had experiences where things have, kind of, if you haven't been in business and been concerned at some point in time, you're lucky, or
you haven't been in business. If you've been in business, you've had failures. That's for sure.
Yeah, and that's where your scarring, comes in.
Yeah. The next steps then build out from that. The next step I refer to is basically being real. And it's just a warning. As you're going through adversity, you can sometimes just surrender what are your principles and values to get yourself out of it. And the sort of this number 4, number 5 is basically saying to you, be real. Do not surrender your values. Just compare the actions and decisions you're taking against what is important to you because in a few months' time, in a few years' time, you may regret that. 6 and 7, I'll just go through because 6 is about care. And it's a whole list in there of the things you can and should do to maintain your emotional, mental, and physical fitness. And you need to put in place a care program. That's vital. And it sets that out. And number 7 is really I call it the light. You can call it the light at the end of the tunnel, but it's really just a message saying that when you're losing a lot, when you're losing everything, when you're losing a lifetime's work, it can become very dark for you individually, and you can go into a dark place. And you need to make sure that doesn't happen. Your champions need to be looking for that. Your partner and your friends need to be looking for that. You need to look for that by creating something at that end of that tunnel, that light, which you can hang on to and pull yourself out. And it's really, in one sense, a warning, but I think a critical part. Accept, clarify, action, champions, be real, care, a light, 7 steps to move you through this adversity and put you on a solid footing, as you mentioned before.
Yeah. Look, I mean, and you raised some pretty, personal issues there for potentially for some listening in. And I know that, that whole area where it becomes around mental health challenges, that's a big part of what you're saying is, physical, mental, emotional, as well. So if that's something, triggered something for anybody, by all means, reach out to, Beyond Blue have a wonderful program. Yes. Yeah. We were going to,
so Beyond Blue or those types of organizations, don't hesitate.
Yeah.
Go there early.
There's a lot of support around. We've had early days on Small Business Banter. We had representatives from Beyond Blue. If it's triggered something, by all means, we both encourage you to reach out and talk to someone about, you and those issues or challenges. That's a great recap overview of the book. Given that owners can be very resilient, very dogged, that's how they became successful or built the business that works for them. So what's your kind of key message to them about maybe doing something different, maybe something really they've never done before, they've never acknowledged, or they've never faced these sort of challenges before? What's a key message to you based on your personal experience, early days, but also, lots of experience since working with other companies and business owners?
Yeah, look, the strength of an entrepreneurial business person is their doggedness. They're willing to keep pushing and not to give up. However, they've got to be very conscious of what they're losing, what they're investing, how much they're exposing themselves. And many business people allow themselves to go too far and then they can't come back. I think there is a tipping point, and there's many businesses which have reached the tipping point who have called it quits. And I think that is not a failure. It is a sensible commercial decision. And I think that's where you've got to release yourself from the business, make a sensible commercial decision, and then take with you what you need to restart.
Yeah, and that happens. People do take corrective action. They do reinvent. They do, they do change tack. They restructure their business. Maybe sometimes they do that, in good times because it's where obviously the business needs to go. But when things are challenged, sometimes you're just forced to think about different ways to do business. And there's been plenty of examples through the last 18 months, and would encourage you to with your champions, your stakeholders, your advisors, your family to really think deeply about other ways, because you can come back, and we want you coming back.
Yeah. And the book, again, under the ideas section, Clarify, puts out a whole range of things which you should consider, which are the options you can maybe do to pivot, to regrow, to find another base, to take forward what you need to. So you don't see this as the end. You see this as, okay, I need to change direction. How do I do that? How do I chop off the losses and take with me what I need to rebuild? Yeah.
Excellent. Look, we may as well just, kind of get in a couple of those references. We talked about Beyond Blue. There's a great organisation called the Small Business Debt Helpline, which you can search up. I'll put that on the notes for the show. Or then your website. Let's talk about where you can get a hold of the book. I'd also encourage. I've been following Richard and his he's a prolific writer on business, on leadership. So, I'd encourage you to go to this website, which is
richardshrapnel.com.
And look, sign up. It's incredibly well put together and thoughtful and helpful. So from there, you can take a look at whether you want to buy the digital book. And I think get yourself a pencil and work through it. Richard, we need to wind this up. Thank you so much for your time today and your input. We don't get a lot of authors per se on Small Business Banter. What I really liked about what you do is the fact that it's rooted in experience of over a long period of time, and it's incredibly practical and it's very timely. We both know there's a lot of owners in a lot of businesses doing it really hard at different stages. So we'd just like them to kind of get on the front foot, maybe think differently and engage. Be honest with themselves and engage with their closest family and friends and professional advisors and dig in and look for another way. So
absolutely,
yeah. Look, Richard, again, thank you very much for your time today, and wish you well. And again, it's
richardshrapnel.com.
Thank you, Richard. All right, all the best.
Thank you very much, Michael. Thank you for the time.
So that is all for today's episode of Small Business Banter. I continue to be inspired bringing you small business experts and other small business owners and hearing their stories. If you want to listen to any past episode, jump onto your podcast platform of choice and search Small Business Banter. There you will find a diverse and fascinating collection of small business owners and experts openly discussing and sharing their experiences. For any of the links, resources, or information we've talked about on the show today, or to contact me, please head over to smallbusinessbanter.com, or you can find us on Facebook and Instagram. And it would be great to have you tune in the same time next week for another episode of Small Business Banter.